Hello, everyone. I am Brabo, and I want to welcome you to the Inspiring Leadership series.
Well, Bo, it's great to have you on the series. Thank you very much for coming all the way over from Ohio in the US of A. And you are one interesting guy. Bo is an author and a fascinating book, From Battlefield to White House to Boardroom. Couldn't be more interesting for me. He's a keynote speaker. He's a coach. And the Bo and the Luke Show, which is a podcast, is in the top 2.5% of global podcasts, which is one huge achievement considering there's 1.7 million podcasts. Bo, welcome. It's great having this series. And tell us a little bit about your current role and your life and your career journey into leadership. I'd love to hear more.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It is just truly great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the Inspiring Leadership series. I think you're doing great work, and it's an important topic. So, my journey about me really goes back, and when we talk battlefield, White House, boardroom, the book was written about my journey with leadership lessons and stories and everything in between mixed in to make the book interesting and for people to read and so forth. But that journey really started at a young age when I was 17 years old in high school. And an Army recruiter came to our high school. We had a career day. And that back then in the mid 80s was the most popular speech or session you could go to on career day. And it was just jam-packed in the school library. So of course I was one of those participants. And it wasn't long after that where I visited the recruiter in person, and the next thing you know, he had me hooked. I said, I want to get into business administration. And he said, well, let me look through my big regulation, this giant book that I have. And he flipped through, it took him a few minutes. And the first thing he found that had the word administration in it was personnel administration. I was 17. I knew nothing. I'm absolutely confident this guy was telling me everything I needed to know. So yep, sure. I'll make the leap between business and personnel for sure. I'll do it. Raised my right hand, enlisted that day, went to boot camp after my junior year of high school. And back then, personnel was human resources, or that's what it is today. And I've been in that my entire life. But it was boot camp, literally at the ripe young age of 17 years old, when I had drill sergeants screaming at me every day and just breaking you down to nothing so they can build you back up into a soldier. And they're doing that to, 200 other guys there along with me. Everybody's getting treated poorly, or, we're all getting treated the same, but for a purpose. And that's when I learned, and I'm very, very, very thankful. That's when I learned discipline. I learned what it was like to get up at 3 a.m. every day, because that's what time they were waking us up. I learned what it was like to get up and go straight from 3 a.m. to doing a push-up, because you're just getting, you're getting hammered with physical fitness. And then that kind of took me through, and I had all this confidence and motivation and inspiration and discipline, really set me up for everything else down the road. I feel I cannot overstress how blessed and fortunate I feel that I had the, I don't know, intestinal fortitude, whatever, to raise my right hand and take that action or make that decision at 17 years old, because it taught me so much. When people ask me today, how do you find, your battle rhythm during the day? How do you get to the gym every morning? How do you find the discipline to not give up and to keep going even when failure hits? And of course I have an answer for that, but in my mind, I'm right back to 17 years old in boot camp, when, you just didn't have a choice, and they just beat that into you, almost literally. But it just turned people into these soldiers, if you will. That's what we were, but we were disciplined, ready to take on the world. So today, through 34 years of human resources, from which included 26 years in the Army, 10 of that was in the White House under Presidents Bush and President Obama as the chief of human resource operations, and as a presidential communications officer, leading teams for both Presidents Bush and President Obama. And then it got me into corporate America after I retired in 2013, and several executive HR roles And then to today, just as the pandemic is starting, I launched my own company called Hail Media Group. And it has been a journey for sure. And all under that umbrella is keynote speaking, writing, coaching, consulting, and so forth. And that's where I'm at today, and just loving every minute of it.
Fantastic, Bo. And you must have had to pivot, because you walked into, in March time, certainly I did, there was the public speaking and the team events and face-to-face coaching. You had to pivot and change.
Yes.
So what did you give up, and what have you modified to? Because you've also got the Brabo Center of Excellence, which I'd love you to tell us about, because
sure,
you're developing these excellent programs for people, and they can get certified, certainly on the HR and the leadership development side, which I think is very exciting. But how did you pivot? What did you give up? Because you couldn't do speaking, you couldn't do team events and things like that. What did you do instead?
Yeah. So I had this, it was unfortunate, of course, for the entire world that this pandemic hits. And right at that time, my book had just been published in February, and I had a book tour planned, had a great big launch party planned in Washington, D.C., and was going to have some VIP guests. And that just went right out the window and never happened, because all those in-person things just weren't gonna cut it. And any speaking that I had done in the past prior to March of this year had pretty much all been in-person events, conferences, you name it. And then that pivot, I was very, very, very lucky in, we had started, let me backtrack just a bit. We had started the idea and putting together the plan for our own podcast. The benefit with that is when this hits, now we're getting all encompassed into Zoom, being online, being behind this camera on a screen like we're doing now. Kind of went with that and got better and better and better at it. So more in tune with speaking behind the mic, with trying to look at the camera as you're speaking, and delivering webinars and so forth over video versus being somewhere in person. That was all part of the pivot. And then in doing the podcast, Jonathan, one of our guests, Marcus Ogden, former NFL player in the United States. He played for 6 or 7 different teams. So he had a good career in the NFL. And then he started a business when he got out. He worked really hard. He lost his business. And he too had to pivot in life. And his story was incredibly inspiring. And today he's a keynote speaker. He's an author. He's a coach. And I felt like Marcus was, I don't know, maybe 3 years ahead of where I saw myself being. Like he's the one that has been there, done that. He's been through the trials and tribulations. So I ended up starting to work with Marcus on a coaching where he's my coach. And he helped me in that pivot of transitioning everything over to the home office, the online environment, connected me with other businesses to even work with them and start doing online webinars, paid webinars and so forth for other individuals and other companies. So that was all part of the pivot that leads to today in doing podcasts like this with you and being on other people's podcasts as a guest. Fantastic opportunity to talk about what you're doing and so forth. And then in all of that, what has come to fruition, because this was not an idea in January, February, or even March, April of this year, was launching the Brabo Center of Excellence, which is an online school, online platform for human resource professionals to earn certification credits. And we just recently got approved by Human Resource Certification Institute as the courses that we produce will be approved for credit for anybody going toward their professional certifications, which is a big achievement for us and for me, so that we can take this content and the stuff I've been working on and doing keynotes about and doing webinars about. Now we'll put it in an online platform to develop leaders within the human resources profession. Correct. It's needed. It's something that's got to happen. And the online school will launch here within the next few weeks, mid-December timeframe, roughly. Once everything is set up and the marketing team's ready to go, and then we'll just have boom, we'll be at it.
Brilliant. Oh, well, congratulations with that. And I think the Brabo Center of Excellence, I'm sure, will do very well. And so with all these stories that you've got such a wealth of experience, the military, the White House, business, and now your own business. Looking back with all the wisdom and the battle scars that you've accumulated, successes, failures, ups and downs, if you met your 18-year-old self, but here's Bo, aged 18, what bit of wisdom and advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would tell myself is don't care what other people think. You can't live your life thinking about whether you want to make a decision or you have an idea about what someone else might think about that idea or what it is that you have to say. I was very, it seems odd today because I do a lot of speaking, but I was very much an introvert, keep things to myself, not because I didn't have thoughts or ideas in my head, but I worried too much about what someone might say or even getting negative feedback or being criticized and so forth. And I've learned through the years, and I think probably even more so in the past, maybe in the past 10 years, that you really can't, number one, please everybody. You just can't. It's impossible. So if you take that as a fact, it helps you along the line of you just got to put your stuff out there. You got to put your thoughts out there. You got to put your ideas out there, and you just have to launch, because if you don't, you'll just always be thinking about the what ifs. What if I would have done that? What if I would have said something? What if I would have brought this idea, to fruition? What would have happened? And I don't want to live with regrets. So that 18-year-old self, I would tell them, I would tell Bo, I would say, hey, don't ever worry about what somebody else thinks. You got to get past that.
That's great bit of advice. And the earlier thought I had was, in all the experience you've had, what were some of the darkest moments in your personal life and your work? And then we'll lift it to some of the lightest moments and the proudest moments you've had. So give us experience of the darkest moments and what you learned from it, how it shaped you, Bo, as a leader.
Sure. I've only spoken about this in public one time, and it was just about 6 weeks ago. I did an in-person. It was the first in-person speaking event this year for a large mortgage company in Cleveland. And it was the first time I've ever publicly spoken about this time as a dark time in my life, but it was very impactful. When I was 16 years old, I got very, very depressed. I was bullied in high school, or especially from 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Back then I was the chunky kid. And I really let that impact me mentally. And I started getting depressed, and then I quit school. I dropped out of high school when I was 16. I did not go back after the Christmas break. So, after months of just feeling really down, super depressed, didn't know what the value of my life was on the earth. And then it was family members that really kind of brought me back and got me back into school the following year. And I think God touched my life and that there was purpose for me. And I went back to school, and I went, and this is where that time frame in my life, I started the story out when I was 17 to join the Army, but it really started in those dark times, or out of those dark times. So I come through that and come through the depression, and I went back to school. Now all my friends were seniors. They graduated, and I was still a junior. I had to do that whole year over again. And that's when I met the Army recruiter, and I went to boot camp, and I got all this discipline and this confidence. And I was a different person when I came out of that. And I went back to school. Now I had turned 18. So in the US here, I was a legal adult, if you will. Went back to my high school, and all my friends are gone. And I just, if I had not been through boot camp, I would not have had the courage to do what I did. And I was 18. I didn't need my parents' permission. So I went into about 3 weeks in, I just said, you know what? This isn't cutting it for me. This is not going to work. And I went into the guidance counselors. I withdrew myself from that school. I drove over to the neighboring county where my father lived, because my parents had been divorced years earlier. And I enrolled myself in the high school in his district. And I had a fantastic, amazing senior year of high school. It was just great. And so I turned the darkness into light, if you will. And you'll have to remind me of the rest of your question.
Yeah, I mean, very powerful. And
Yeah.
I think, particularly with the work my wife and I do with people who are bullied at school, often vulnerable girls.
Yeah.
Girls can, I mean, blokes can be bad, but girls can be really tough on each other,
Right.
particularly in their young age, and
Yeah.
image and body image and that kind of stuff. And so I really relate to how tough it must have been for you and the bullying. I was bullied at school too. Fine enough in my my final 2 years, and bullied for being too nice. They said I was too nice,
Yeah.
and call
I
me
get
names
that.
also. And just you think, how does this fit? I've been brought up to have these strong values of kindness and care, and then you've got some really quite toxic people who
Absolutely.
really mess up people's lives. And the lovely thing is I've gone back and met them since in the army. Some of them got through, some didn't get through the army, but I was able to be completely gracious from a position of power where I was senior to them, or I could help them out. And I did. But I did remind them, and I said, just think about the impact that you have on people.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't mean that,
Yeah. That was the talking about the rest of your question, where you were going with the impact of that on my leadership today. I think it truly, without a doubt, helped me when I'm responsible for folks and they're under my leadership, and it really helps in the empathy that I can display when you take the view of what's happening from the other person's perspective, right? And maybe something because you care about them, you know what their life is like, what's happening at home in the family. And then if they're feeling depressed or down, or they're just not having a great day, right? If you've never experienced those things, it may be hard to relate to it. Yeah. So I think that has helped me tremendously, and what I've been able to accomplish throughout the years, and really being a go-to person to help people through their issues. Yeah. And it's having those empathetic eyes. And I absolutely give tons of credit for that experience as a young teenager.
Yeah. And it's almost, I get the sense that you're also, like me, a fan of the sort of Stoic philosophy that I'm glad it happened to me, or it happened to you. Yeah. It made us the stronger. I wouldn't wish it on anybody at the time, but it really, particularly the military discipline as well that we both had, it allows us to face whatever they throw at us. And life does throw things at us. And what about the high points in life? What would be a couple of proud moments of your life that you really were really chuffed about? And yes. What it taught you?
Of course. Absolutely amazing days when my children were born. Those were just unbelievable moments. I don't think you can quite compare too many things to that. And I'm thankful and grateful that I was present, and that I was able to be there, and I wasn't deployed or something like that with the Army, and I was actually present for both of my daughters when they were born. Those are definitely highlights. From a career perspective, there are several, and as you get older, you get more wise, or even when I'm putting things together to write my book and what am I going to write about, I can definitely define pivotal moments for myself that really kind of led to where I am today. And one of those was simply, I highlighted it in my book. It was just a phone call, and I happened to take the call, and I was working one day, and the gentleman's one of my best friends today, but we were both on active duty, but we were not working together, and he was recruiting me for a certain special assignment. And I just happened to take the phone call, listen to what he had to say, and it was not a lot, because there was a lot of classified stuff happening where he was working, and there's just things he could not tell me about the organization. But he said, "Hey, you want to jump out of planes?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Sounds like fun." And he said, "Okay, send me X documentation about yourself, and we'll go from there." And I just said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I sent it along. I really didn't know who he was, where he was at. This was the days before, you could Google people That stuff didn't exist. So I sent him all my paperwork, and that was a real defining moment because it turned into, it really led the way to what happened next. And I got the job, got the assignment, and that's where I met the individual who actually hired me to go work at the White House, because he was my boss in that job. And then he was the guy I replaced, because I was at the White House for a few years, and then I left, went to Germany, deployed to Iraq. I was gone for a few years, came back and replaced that same guy, and only now I was the boss and the one in charge.
Right.
So very, very, very much highlights. One of the things that I am very proud of, and it was an accomplishment for me in my military career, was when I decided that I would put in an application and hope for selection to the U.S. Army Warrant Officer Corps. So I did that. I had all kinds of support in my command to do it, and it's a very competitive endeavor. And I was fortunate; I got selected. And then when I went to warrant officer candidate school, that was one of the most arduous trainings events I had ever been in. And all you can say is they give you a million tasks to complete. They know you can't get them all done, but they're going to see how you come out of that and how you deal with it and how do you prioritize and how do you work together as a team. And you have all of these things you have to abide by. There's an honor code, and you're confined in this almost volatile environment to accomplish all of the stuff that you have to do and learn along the way. And then there's a rotation of who's in charge and so forth. So when I talk about like even leadership development in corporate America, and we say, how do you relate that to the military? Well, in the military, you get trained, you get tested, and then you go out and do. So in this environment with the candidate school, you're not really being trained because you're already been in leadership positions before you get there, but you are being tested from the moment you walk in the door. And then a highlight of that for me at the very end, I think there were roughly 60 students or so forth, 60 of us in this course. Everybody's had already been in the Army for, say, roughly between 8 and 12, 13 years, right? So nobody's new to the Army soldier game. We're all playing it. Nobody's new to leadership. And then at the very end, about a week from completion, they gather all of the students, and it's like voting. So everybody has to determine who they felt, not from the cadre or the instructors, but the students, the ones that are in this thing together, who stood out as the best leader in their class, and getting the teams or the class through all of these assignments and tasks that you had to perform. And I was selected as the best leader of the class. And so then I led the class I was the leader of the class for the last week of before graduation. That it's a little almost looks like a trophy, piece of glass. It's etched, has my name on it. That award that I received at graduation was probably one of the best awards I've ever received. It's not a medal that I could pin on my uniform, because that was something that was given to me by my peers.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah.
That was, defining moment for myself, that I've built some, and at that point I was roughly 34 years old. So I have a foundation here. I have a leadership foundation that I'm actually executing and taking care of people and making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and all of those types of things. And I can take that and continue building upon that. And that's what I've done.
Brilliant. And now we're going to have a whistle-stop tour around the 8 components of what makes inspiring leaders, and the research that we've done. The first one is moral quotient, MQ. And sort of what moral values and virtues do you aspire to live by? And when you've let them slip, how have you got yourself back on track again, Bo?
Sure. That question is steeped in what I write about and what I even speak about in values-based leadership. In that I learned, and I hate to keep harping on this, but it's just the way it went for me. The values, 7 values of the United States Army: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. I adopted those at an early age, that were proven to be a great moral compass. You can do that. You can apply those to your personal life. You can modify them, modify the definitions, look at the type of behaviors that would be amplified by those values and that moral compass, if you will. Um, and I even encourage business leaders to do the same. If you don't know what your corporate values are, or you're having a hard time establishing them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with those 7 values. Pick a few of them, pick all of them, but let's get to work on defining how you can use those in your company. So from the MQ perspective, that's where I go. And when I start to slip, I'm fortunate that I have all types of material that I can go back and research or reference and read about and so forth, just to get my mind. I think it's, I had a leader in the Army, and his saying or his quote was, "Get your mind right," and that has stuck with me for, wow, 15 years now.
Yeah, that's a really good saying. Get your mind right. I'm writing that down, actually.
Yeah.
Mental attitude is everything. Your attitude defines your altitude, as one of my instructors would say to me. And then on to PQ, which is, what gives your life meaning and purpose. The Indians talk about dharma, or your calling, or your vocation. Why do you do what you do now? And, what gives your life meaning?
I think my life has meaning because of the gifts and talents that were given to me. I'm a Christian man, and I truly believe that my gifts are divine. They came from God. He gave me what he gave me. He gave you what he gave you, and that's the calling that I've had. And for me, it's, someone says, or I'll tell people, like, what's my calling? My calling is to help others. Well, don't we all kind of want to help others? But I tell you, Jonathan, I have had so many experiences where I've had people lined up outside my door, one just waiting to talk about any issue that's bothering them or that they need help with. And I've had this, I've had this gift, and I've executed it. So it's not like, oh yeah, I'm good at that and I don't do it. This is what I absolutely do. And when I talk with people, I truly take on their issues as if they were my own issues. And we got to find solutions. There has to be a way to work through this. And you never know really the impact of that on what you're doing, which is okay by me. I don't have to know. I don't have to be rewarded in any way, shape, or form. I just have to keep doing what I do. And I have passion for that. Yeah. And I think that's a big piece of trying to figure out what your calling or your purpose is whether or not you have any like self-passion for the work or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
No passion, maybe you want to reassess. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I love that quote. The people who know what and how will always work for the people who know why. And the next one is HQ, which of course to us as ex-military men, we'd think it's headquarters, but it's not. It's health quotient. And you and I were chatting before we went on air about just how important it is to keep ourselves as fit as we possibly can, even in early 50s for you and late 50s for me. And so tell us a bit about, how important it is to you now, health and well-being, what you do to keep in good shape mentally and physically.
I think it's absolutely critical. We'll start physically first. Your health, your physical health is it. I'm not a scientist, but I do read, and there's all types of reading you can do about the connection truly between physical health and mental health. And when you exercise and so forth, and the hormones and stuff that get released from the mind and that are just produced in your body, and then that impacts your mind and how you feel. So there's a physical connection between the two. So for physical fitness, I mean, for me, it's I love lifting weights. So I do that. I'm lifting weights probably 4 times a week. Then I have some cardio as well to keep the heart and everything in shape the best that I can. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I'm still hitting new new personal records, on the bench press and on the leg and in strength and endurance and conditioning. And I'm surprised every time. I'm like, man, this is great. Right. And what I've applied that to, and I use the physical fitness as an analogy to life. And even if you're an entrepreneur or even just in general, and you want to get promoted at work, whatever the case might be, when you go to the fitness center or you're working out at home, when you make it consistent and you make it hard, so your consistency plus hard work, uh, physically, you will see gains. It's almost impossible to not see gains. That's just how our human body biologically works. Muscle breaks down, it builds back up. And as you keep pushing it over and over and over, time and time again, and you're consistent, they'll grow stronger and stronger and stronger. And you will continue your physical fitness journey, and you'll just keep getting better. And I think that applies to life. If you're consistent and you work hard and you don't quit and you don't give up, you will see gains in life. So how does that transition to your mental state? Well, I think anytime you're making gains, you're going to feel good about the gains that you're making. And, I think you have to make sure that I love reading. You need to read all kinds of different books, if you will, professional development books, occasionally read a fiction book to build your creativity or whatever, innovation in your mind, and create stories in your mind. Your spiritual side, right?
Yeah.
All applies.
Great. No, and you've made me think, I particularly am enjoying a book called Range, which is about, everybody talks about the 10,000 hours and purposeful practice and, how you can become a chess master or a golfer at the age of 2 if you're Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
But they're now finding that those are what they call kind of activities, but the really wicked ones need a lot of mental and physical range. And so computers can't do those as they can do those kind of, they can't do the other skills, which are more wicked. I found that a very interesting book. Onto IQ, decision-making wisdom. I'm particularly interested, a bit off at a tangent, but in the current climate, people have to make decisions. They're in tough meetings. They've got really complex budgets to sort out and things. Any kind of tips that you've got about running good virtual meetings where they've got to make decisions and you've got a group of, 10 of them there in a room on Zoom? Yeah. Any kind of 2 or 3 tips you'd pass over? I haven't asked you this before, but I just wondered.
Yeah, no, sure. Number one, you have to have, and I think this applies to, number one, if you're going on Zoom, mandatory that you have your video on. People have to see each other. It's the best way you have today, closest you're going to get to in-person meetings. So you cannot have, when you think about meetings or even training sessions, that you set up or that you run, you got to have some protocols, right? It's like, what are our rules of engagement for the meetings that we hold? So when it comes to Zoom or online or video conferencing, yeah, got it. Zoom will give you a dial-in phone number as well, but that's not the protocol for the meeting. You got to be ready. You got to be seated, whatever, and you have to have the video on so that you can all see each other, right? So that's number one tip. Number two, just like any meeting, you have to have a purpose. You have to have communicated that purpose, and you have to have a process or a system by which you're going to attack the meeting. So it's a decision. So if we're talking about getting to a decision, we're talking about a decision-making process. So you can't, it's not waiting until the meeting to figure out what that process is going to be. So if you're leading the meeting, this is one of those leadership skills or tactics. And if you think about just a simple phrase that you lead people and you manage tasks, well, if you want people to perform inside of a meeting in a certain way to get to the best possible decision, you have to have communicated with them prior to and influence them on what it is you need them to bring to the table, because we're going to be making a decision on X. And you have to come with a process. So you have to have a decision-making process in place for you to execute in that meeting. Everybody needs to know what it is. and you need to be prepared. So it's giving homework before the meeting if you can, as much time as possible. Not always, depending upon what's happening or what type of crises might be hitting you, especially today. You never know when the next lockdown's coming or what's happening. But you have to be prepared as possible for the meeting. And if we haven't learned anything in the past 8 months, if you've learned nothing else, I would hope that you've started to learn that you have to be prepared. You have to have a crisis leadership mentality and have things that you're going to execute when those things happen. If you think about an airline, one of the founders of one of our major airlines in the US wrote the foreword to my book. And we talk about what's called a VUCA environment: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, right? And that's kind of what people have been thrust into due to COVID-19. Everybody, all businesses have been put into it, but with very little experience of ever having to deal with a real crisis in their business. But you take an airline, crisis can happen with an airline any day, and it's not related to a pandemic. It could be a crash, it can be an accident on the runway, it can be anything. And they've developed these standard operating procedures. So when a crisis does happen, in literal sense, they pull the book out. Step one, call the airport fire department. Step two, they've just got this laid out. And maybe in that moment, it's an 80% solution already in place. And then leadership on top of that, you really can make some the best decisions you can make in those environments, in those scenarios. So yeah.
That's great.
That could be a whole topic in and of itself.
I can tell. It's great. That's very handy, actually, Bo. Thank you. And then we talk about people and relationships. EQ, emotional and social intelligence. It's a huge area in itself. But the skill of rapport building and really listening to people. Would you give any tips on that? How have you seen people listen really well?
Yeah. So I have this mantra, and first and foremost, it's based upon, I think, is the most critical aspect of leadership, and that's caring, having a caring mentality, caring attitude for your people. You have to truly care about them. And then, of course, number two is to be able to listen. So you have to be a great leader, you have to be a great listener. And one of the things I tell people, like if you struggle with this, say in a corporate environment, right, of really listening, there is a physical thing that you can do to help yourself listen. So someone comes into your office, and just like you and I now, we're sitting at our desk. Well, when we're sitting at our desk, you've got your computer in front of you, your phone might be on your desk, and somebody sits down in your office, or they sit down across from you, or they're standing up. You have the potential for all these distractions. So the best thing for you to do is to stand up. You're not looking at your computer. You get more at eye level, so you're eye to eye with the individual, and then ask them to tell you what it is that they want to tell you, and look at them. It's really, really hard to then look at the other things that could distract you from the conversation. So you have to be purposeful in getting rid of distractions in order to listen. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nicely put. And I love walking meetings in those days. Do you remember those days when we used to meet people?
Yeah, I do.
Much. And I have some lovely walking meetings with people. Or what we do now is we call each other and we both go for a walk. And we're out of the office to get them out of there. Resilience, the next one. RQ. How have you picked yourself up in times of adversity? And boy, whether you're jumping out of airplanes as I did or doing other things, you've had a few. And what gives you the resilience to get through tough times?
Yeah, number one is my faith. Number two is family, and number three is really focusing on what we talked about earlier in health and wellness, physical and mental health. We all go through times of adversity, ups and downs, some worse than the rest. But you do have to have something that you as an individual grab onto. For me, number one, it's faith. There's a bigger purpose than me on this earth, but there's a reason for us all to be here. And oh, by the way, something I learned, Jonathan, it seems so simple. But having gone through, and this is, there's so many best practices that I learned in that over 2 decades military journey, and you're going through all these different types of things, even combat, right? So I knew that, that was not easy. That was really one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And getting on a bus and saying goodbye to my small children, and that you're going somewhere where people want to, there's an enemy that wants you dead. They want, they don't want you to come there, but you're going, you're being, this is what you do. I learned something really simple that helps me through those times. And that was always, I would tell myself, you can't stop the clock, right? So even if it's arduous training or real world, you're in combat, the clock's going to keep ticking. There's going to come a day when this ends. It will end. The training will end, right? Running everywhere you go for airborne training, or to jump out of an airplane, or even when you're up in the sky and you're waiting to jump and you're getting airsick or you're getting whatever, that, well, it's not going to be too much longer and this is going to end because I'm going to jump out of this airplane, right? So having the attitude, it goes with your attitude or the mentality that when it's a tough time, and with experience, you'll be able to look back and say, yep, every tough time at some point comes to an end. There will be an end, and then it'll transition into something better. So it was a little mental game, I guess, that I played with myself.
I love it. You can't stop the clock. That's really
can't stop the clock.
Last two, brand, BQ, brand reputation, image, impact, and then we'll go on to legacy. But what have you learned from 360 feedback that you've had over the years, and your mistakes and sort of lifelong learning? What have you learned from that to give you the brand?
It was eye-opening, really, from a 360. And this was the most recent one. It was about three years ago when I was going through the executive MBA program. And, the 360 subordinates, peers, superiors. And in reading the results, it's really profound. In reading the results, I had very, very high rankings in leadership and so forth from subordinates and from peers. And then when you read the superiors and what the superiors thought, they had a lot more to say, right? And it wasn't the highest rankings in the 360. And then I really thought about that for a moment, and they weren't bad rankings. So if subordinates and peers out of the 5-point scale was somewhere around like 4.9, 4.85, but then from the superiors it was like 4.0, right? So it was still significantly different than how subordinates and peers viewed me. And I thought, you know what? I think that's great, right? I love that. I took that as it truly does identify me, because when I'm in those positions, I'm concerned about serving those that I lead. I'm not as concerned about serving those who lead me. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. In fact, I was just writing a 360-degree report on a managing director, and she's loved by the people she leads and some of her peers, but her bosses always find her hard. She just kicks back against them and doesn't like them meddling in her part. That's very interesting. And Bo, on to the final bit. And God, this has been really great. I've really enjoyed this. Found it such a wealth. We've only just skimmed across it. They do say that in when people speak, you only learn about 10% of what they're thinking about, and that's
I believe that.
So on legacy, what would you like your personal and your work legacy to be when you pass into the next life?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I've thought a lot about that this year, especially, and having to pivot and what's happening. And I think the legacy, it's combined. I'm trying to turn my personal into what I'm doing for work in the Keynote, in the coaching and speaking, and the Brabo Center of Excellence. The legacy that I would love to be remembered for and to live on is that I did my best to pass on everything that I have learned and that I've been able to do and execute to others, so that, there's always the building up of those who come after you, to be able to leave. That's why I think things like the podcast, right? It's not doing a podcast because I want, to make $100 million like Joe Rogan or something like that. The podcast is an opportunity to leave a legacy. It's recorded. It's us talking with guests about all of these types of things, and I think that will be super important. The writing, the same way. There's a book. There's a journey for not just non-family members, but even for my own family. Generations to come. Who was our great grandfather? Here, read his book. Right, you'll learn all about him. Type of thing. Yeah, it's those types of things.
That's brilliant. In fact, you make me smile because my own two daughters, I got two daughters as well, who are now 26 and 27. They haven't got round to reading Dad's book. They know it's just like your own family never kind of finished reading it.
Yeah.
My father, who was a fast jet pilot in the Navy and trained with the US Navy too in Pensacola in Texas,
nice.
on the Gulf there, he had a saying which my mother told me about because he was killed when I was 3, and that was, "Don't die with the music still in you." And I think that's what you have shown us today, Bo, that you're determined to pass on the skills and the knowledge and the experience that you've hard fought. You've had to learn it. And I just say thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership Series. I found you very inspiring, very authentic, and you bring what I always look for, which is a bit of humility, some humanity, a bit of humor, but a wealth of experience. And thank you for sharing it. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Jonathan. It has been a wonderful, wonderful time. I appreciate it very much.
That's all. Cheers, Bo.